Howdy fellas, how's it going? In this video I'm going to be going through all the tendencies in the game and explaining how they work, and also through the vitals and a few other things that I think are important to know if you're going to make a player offline. So first things first, let's go into the vitals. And there are going to be timestamps in the description for certain areas where I'm explaining things. So all this stuff up here is just things about your character, what age they are, when they were born, etc, etc. First thing that's important to know is your dominant hand, obviously whether they're going to be left or right-handed. Then we're going to go into dominant dunk hands. So if you have this left or right, they're only going to dunk with that hand. Whereas if you want to put it to either, you probably should. They can dunk with either hand. It makes way more sense. Now, years pro, if you want to give this character kind of a backstory and say that, oh, he's been in the NBA a few years, or he's played professionally overseas a few years before he came into the league, you can slap on some years pro and it'll just kind of give him a little bit of uniqueness when you look at his player. Now, peak start age and peak end age, if you want a guy to peak early, you still can't put this low. It doesn't mean that they're going to reach their potential by 23. 2K doesn't work that way. At 23, if you have it set like this, he's going to stop improving. And whatever overall he reached by the time he got to 23, he will maintain until his peak end age, where he will get worse. So hypothetically, the best you could ever have is 40 and 41, which means he's always going to improve until he hits 40, and at 41, he will start going down. Now, potential, minimum potential, maximum potential is just if you want to give them kind of the chance to be better or the chance to be way worse. So if you want a guy to have a chance to be a bust or a chance to be way higher than anyone could have projected him to be, then you can make this really high and this really low, and then make the percents where, yeah, there's a pretty good chance that he'll bust, and there's a pretty good chance that he'll boom and end up way better than people thought he would be. Or you could just make him be the average percent for the regular potential that you gave him. Now, play for winner, financial security, and loyalty are just things that are going to affect when you're trying to sign this player to a contract. Obviously, if they're more loyal, they're going to try to stay with the current team. Financial security, they really care about money. Play for winner, they want you to be a contender, or they don't want to be on your team. Now, the really important things in vitals is when we get down here to play initiator. So if you want your guy to bring the ball up, even if it's a Draymond Green, he just grabbed down a rebound, he's going to bring the ball up and start your offense. You want play initiator on. Ben Simmons, LeBron James, even guys that don't run point, if you want them to bring the ball up, they have to have this on. And just while I'm here, force non-starters if you want to have a guy kind of like Lou Williams, who, although he is a higher overall than the guy who's starting in front of him, if you just want him to always be a bench guy, you can make it for one season, or you could just make it to where he's always going to be a bench guy for his entire career. Now, the play types are super important when you're talking about tendencies and how a player is going to play when you're watching them. So play type 1 through 4 is how often they're going to do these plays. So the most predominant one's going to be 1, a little bit less on 2, a little bit less on 3, and every now and then they'll do the 4th one. So I cleared these out here so we can go through every one of them together. Isolation, isolation point, and isolation wing are all inherently the same thing. Isolation and isolation point are just going to change around some of the plays a little bit. They are the exact same play types. If you went to the edit playbook, you could still have the same stuff on there because they are inherently just isolation plays. And what an isolation is, if you're completely new to basketball, it's just when a player wants to go one-on-one with another player. Now, isolation wing just means when he does that ISO, he's going to be on the wing. If you don't know what the wing is, I can't help you too much. Pick and roll ball handler and pick and roll point are pretty much the same thing as well. You are the guy with the ball in a pick and roll set. Once again, pick and roll ball handler and pick and roll point are the same thing, just some of the plays are switched. But inherently you're still that guard in that play. Pick and roll wing just means that you're the ball handler and you're doing a pick and roll on the wing. Pick and roll man, which means you are the big man in a pick and roll set. You're the one setting the screen. Post up low, you will run plays to get you the ball on the block. Post up high, you will run plays to get you the ball on the elbow or just further away from the basket. Now, I will say post up high, it doesn't trigger much. Even if you have a guy who's supposed to get the ball a lot, he's the best guy on the team. Post up high is not really going to trigger often, nor is it really effective. So if you're going to make somebody who's just supposed to be a really efficient post scorer, I probably wouldn't even put this on them. Guard post up, if you're going to make a guy like Kobe or Michael or LeBron or somebody who, inherently isn't a big but can play in the post, guard post up is going to run a play to where they can get on the block. And guard post up also kind of opens up the idea that when they're ISOing or when they're driving, it's going to run through the player's mind that he could post up because he has a post game. So you could slap this in at 2 or 3 and just kind of give that player a little bit more of a personality because he has a different skill set than some other guards. Now cutter is completely off ball. You're basically just going to be running plays to get you a screen to be going downhill. Mainly it's for guys who have good off ball speed but not good on ball speed, and that are good at finishing around the basket so they can catch lobs, they can, get in the lane and still do damage, even though they're not really good when the ball is in their hands. Now handoff receiver and handoff passers, pretty self-explanatory. Obviously this guy's going to be receiving the ball on a handoff and this guy's going to be giving him the ball. Once this handoff happens, other tendencies will kick in to really what happens. We'll go through that later. It's practically the same stuff that you would look for if you were doing pick and roll. Now mid-range is an off-ball play to get your player the ball in the mid-range area, and 3-point is the same thing, off-ball. They'll come off screens to get them the ball for 3-point looks. So if you're trying to make a Klay Thompson sort of guy, you'd want this. Mid-range, if you're trying to make a DeMar DeRozan, a Kobe, you'd want mid-range. And like I said before, these go in order of how often they're going to do them. So if you want a guy to isolate a lot, you'll slap down on there, post up high second, pick and roll man, whatever. He will always do this one first, second, third, a little bit less as we go on. Now I'm going to jump into the hot zones for a quick second just because I feel like it makes it a lot easier to understand tendencies. First off, you're going to have all these little zones. So you have the shot under basket zone, the shot close left, shot close middle, shot close right, and you'll see it just keeps going around. If you don't know what these areas mean and you're trying to make tendencies, I would definitely go through here and try to memorize or try to understand a little bit better where these actual spots are so that when you make your player, you know what you're doing. So going into the tendencies here, now step through shot is when you use your pivot foot to take a step through layup or a step through jump shot. Guys like Kobe Bryant will have this pretty high, 85, 90 if you really want them to do it. Any lower than really high, they don't do it too often. Shot under basket in those little areas that we were talking about, this is how often they're going to want to shoot when they're underneath the goal in that little area that we talked about. Shot close is how often they're going to shoot in general from the shot close area, and then you can get a little more, break it down and go into which specific areas of shot close that he would like to shoot. Shot mid-range, the exact same thing. This is how often he's going to shoot middies in general. This is how often he's going to shoot from these specific areas. Now you realize we now have spot up shot mid-range and off-screen shot mid-range. So off-screen shot mid-range is really only going to come into play if you have the mid-range play type, because you're going to run that off-ball play. Let's say you're on the block, you come out to the corner, guy sets a screen, you rotate in from the elbow. If you have off-screen shot mid-range, then once you catch that ball, he's going to be way more likely to want to shoot it as opposed to driving or trying to make another play. Spot up shot mid-range means that in general, when he's not involved in the play, you're just kind of doing freelance offense, he's going to spot up around the mid-range area. So for guys like Tim Duncan or guys that aren't really great 3-point shooters but can really shoot a mid, you want this pretty high so that it can still kind of space the floor. Now shot 3, since you understand middies and you understand shot close, it's the exact same thing with spot up and off-screen shot 3, except now we're doing it at the 3-point. So if you have the 3-point play style, then off-screen shot 3 is going to be what affects that. Now as we go down, you're going to see that we now have contested jumper 3 and contested jumper mid-range. So even though, let's say I have shot 3 right center, let's say 99, 100, when he gets to the right wing, he's going to try to shoot it almost every time. It's going to run through his head, this is my spot, I want to shoot this ball. Now, if I have contested jumper 3 really low, then he might not still. Because if it's 0, that means I'm contested at all. I don't really want to shoot it. Whereas 8, if he's got a little bit of wiggle room, he'll shoot up to 15, 20. I really wouldn't put this high. The very most I'd go is 45, unless I'm trying to make some silly character. I might put it really high. But for realistically, if I want them to be efficient, I'm not going to put it above 45. I feel like 22, 25, at least for 2K23, is a really good kind of medium. Same for the mid-range, the same sort of areas I talked about. Now step back jumper 3 and step back jumper mid-range, they're going to do the step back animation in the signatures. Hopefully you know what that is. And these are only going to trigger when you're in a drive. So I'm going to go through this later, but in the driving, if you don't have a really high drive tendency, then these aren't going to trigger. So try to keep that in mind. And the same thing with spin jumper, it's only going to trigger if your character's driving. So try to make sure that your driving tendency is high enough to where he's actually going to do these things. Now transition pull at 3 is when you have the ball and you're in a fast break, and you're coming down the floor. Once you're at the 3-point line, if you have this really high, he's damn near going to shoot it every time. I'd be really careful when you adjust this. I feel like it doesn't really take into account the other 3-point 3-point tendencies as much. What I mean by that is if transition pull-up 3 is 100 and your contested 3 is low, he still might shoot it almost every time he comes up the floor with it. So like I said, just be kind of careful. This tendency is a little wonky. Now, drive pull-up 3 is really great for guys like Damian Lillard and Stephen Curry, where, you know, they come off screens really far away from the basket, and when they start their drive towards the basket, they're still behind the 3-point line just because they have that much range. So if that big drops, if that guy comes under the screen during that drive, they'll shoot. Drive up pull-up 3 is another one that's really particular. 30 is actually a lot, like I said, for 2K23. Now, drive pull-up mid-range, like I said, these have drive in there. They're only going to pick up if you're in the drive motion. So even if you have pick and roll ball handler, even if you make a guy who's really good at slashing, if you don't give him drive, he will never actually go to the basket, and he'll never actually have these, you know, other drive type tendencies kick in. And the last one for jump shooting is use glass. So anytime that you do a jump shot, this is how often he's going to use the glass and use the backboard and try to, you know, bank it in. So now that we're in layups and dunks, shooting has a ton, so we're going to start flying through these now. Driving layup is if I was driving. Like I said, you have to have the driving on. If I just ran to the basket and I just held X or square, the shoot button, and just did a regular layup, this is what animation I would get. Standing dunk is underneath the basket, that shot close, shot under basket area. And because there is no standing layup tendency, you can assume that by having standing dunk 80, he'll try to dunk it more than he'll try to lay it up. Now, driving dunk is going to compete with driving layup, and that's if I just ran to the basket and I held X or square while holding the right trigger, and it was just a random whatever dunk comes out. Flashy dunk is the same thing, except now I'm doing the flashiest dunk that are in my signatures. Alley-oop, so this would be the dunker in that scenario. Once you get to 60, 70, 80, you know, the higher up you go, the more they're going to be asking guys to throw it up so that they can dunk, so they can lay it in. Obviously, too high is a bit of a problem. Eventually, they'll just kind of end up throwing it out of bounds, so be kind of lenient with that, although I feel like 85, 90 for an off-ball slasher type is pretty safe. Now, putback is when they get the rebound in the air and they put it back in without actually coming down. Most times it's a dunk animation. I haven't really seen this be a problem if you have it too high. The AI doesn't, you know, miss a rebound because they went for a putback and not a regular rebound attempt. It's not really scripted that way since they're obviously CPU. So if you just want a guy to do putbacks, I don't see it as a bad thing. It's not going to hurt you if you have this putback tendency really high. Crash does not mean crash the backboards. Crash actually just means fall down. So when you take a 3, when you take a layup, your character might just fall on the floor and remain on the ground for 15 seconds and not really get back on defense. And in my experience, I haven't really seen it ever result in a foul or any free throws of any sort. So it's really just kind of a personality trait if you want your guy to fall down sometimes. Now, spin layup, hop step layup, euro step, and floater. Once again, these are only going to kick in if you have a good drive tendency and your character is in the act of driving. So if you make a guy who's supposed to be really good around the basket, you still have to have that driving tendency for these things to kick in. Now, something really important to understand about tendencies that is kind of hard for some people to grasp is that these are not percentages. These are just kind of higher chances on a dice roll. So for example, when I'm driving, what he can do when he's driving is a driving layup, a driving dunk, a flashy dunk, a spin, hop step, euro step, or a floater. All of those are competing with one another. So if I make one of them really predominant, let's say, you know, I do spin layup 99, then it's actually going to cancel out a lot of these other ones that only have a low percent, like 12 and 45 and 20. You're not really going to see those kick in much, although you would say 20 is a pretty decent one, 45 is a pretty decent one, because you gave spin layup such a high dice roll percentage. So you kind of want to mix those to where, you know, sometimes he'll do different things. And another thing to keep in mind is that 2K is not smart enough to really know what situation is the right one to do a certain move in. For example, if you're driving and it would be a perfect time to do a spin layup with the, you know, the way the defender is guarding you, he's not going to do it. He doesn't have the awareness for it. 2K is not really that great. Like I said, it is simply just a dice roll. So sometimes to do the perfect move and it looks great, and other times, you know, he did a hop step into 4 people and it was goofy. And that's just how it is. That's just kind of, you know, what we deal with. So going into drive setup, when he's beginning to drive, he'll either do a size up, a hesitation, or nothing. Now, size up is just going to be your signature size up animation in your signatures. Hezi, the same thing, the hezi that you have equipped, or a no setup dribble. For the most part, you want no setup dribble to be higher than these, unless you're, you know, trying to make a sauce god of some sort. Obviously, before a player drives, they don't immediately start doing kind of dribble moves, and that's going to tire them out quickly, even if they did. So going into triple threat, pump fake, triple threat, jab step, idle, and shoot. Once again, these are competing with each other the same way that these three are competing with one another. When your character gets the ball, you're now in a triple threat, which means you could pass, shoot, or drive. And these are going to kick in whether you're in that triple threat scenario or not. So what I mean by that, let's say caught the ball, you drove, you pump fake, you can't move anymore. So technically you don't have the option of driving, so you're not really in a triple threat, but pump fake and jab step and shoot and all of these are still going to kick in. So for pump fake, it's just faking a shot and trying to get your defender in the air. Like I said, he'll do this whenever. If you give him a really high pump fake and you give him a really high step through shot, you know, you can make a Kobe Bryant, a Hakeem Olajuwon type of player that has a really good balance of footwork. You know, you can throw in some jab steps, which is basically where you kind of shift your foot and try to get the defender off of you a little bit. Triple threat idle just means that you do nothing. Your character just does that idle animation where ball's above their head, they're just swinging around protecting the ball. They're not doing anything at that time. Triple threat shoot. This does not inherently mean that they are going to shoot if it lands on this dice roll. It just means that it will cycle through the character's mind to shoot the ball. So what I mean by that is, let's say you had triple threat shoot to 80. So he'd do it pretty often once he caught the ball. It's also going to cycle through what your actual jump shooting is. So say he catches it on the left wing, you know, you got to go to the left wing and see what his tendency is to shoot from there. Then you got to look at contested jumper 3 and see how often he's going to shoot in somebody's face. Because if I have contested jumper 100 and I have triple threat shoot 100, then you can kind of piece together it's not going to matter in that scenario. He's just going to shoot it every time. So other things will affect different tendencies. You know, try to keep that in mind. A lot of things compete with one another. This is the entire brain of your character. So try to think of it as if you were in that situation and things that you would be considering. Now, getting into the driving tendencies, drive is simply how often your character will try to attack the basket in any way. Obviously, if you put this to 100, he's going to immediately just start running straight if that's all you had. Drive is not really a terrible thing as long as their character's good at it and has good badges and ways to get around the defender. You know, once you start getting kind of low, you know, 65, 50, it'll start to feel like that player had a lane and he didn't take it, and unless they're a really great shooter, you don't really want those sort of things happening. So drive is definitely something you want high. Spot up drive is going to compete with your other spot ups. So if we go back into jump shooting, you see we have spot up shot mid-range, spot up shot 3, and we have spot up drive. So those three will compete with one another. Like I said, when they're on freelance offense and everybody's just kind of doing their own thing, where is your character going to be spotting up at? So off-screen drive, how this is going to affect the game is you're going to be standing around the mid-range, around the shot close area, and a lot of times there's an animation in the game where as they catch the ball, their momentum is already going towards the basket and they're going to try to attack. Even if they don't get that animation exactly, the second they get the ball, they're going to immediately drive because they've already landed on the dice roll of off-screen drive. And then from there, you now go into your driving tendencies and all of these other ones will take effect. I totally forgot to talk about off-screen drive here. So basically what off-screen drive is going to do is compete with your off-screen mid-range and off-screen three-point. So if you have off-screen drive really high, then once you come off that screen and catch the ball, your character's not even going to think about shooting, they're just going to start their driving, and then the other driving tendencies will kick in. Now on the drive right tendency, we have it at 50 here, which means he will go left and he will go right the same amount. The more I go above 50, he's going to have a higher tendency to actually drive right rather than left, and the opposite effect, the lower I go from 50, he'll drive left a lot more than he'll drive right. Now driving crossover, spin, all these moves are just different signature dribbles that your character is going to compete with as to what he's going to do when he's driving. So right now we have him to where his main move is a driving crossover. All these are going to say driving just to kind of emphasize that he has to be in the driving motion for these to actually take effect. If your character's just standing there, he's not going to start doing every move in the book unless you have isolation on. If he starts an isolation play, these will kick in even though he's not driving, but you want to make sure that these are made in a way to where they make sense. Don't give him, you know, driving spin 100, driving crossover 5. This character will just sit there like a monkey and, you know, spin his brains out. I really wouldn't recommend going above 65 unless it's going to be the main move that this character is going to do. And a lot of the stuff, like I said, you have to keep in mind that they cancel each other out. So even if I go, say, driving crossover 70, that seems like a lot. But if you come down here, you'll see no driving dribble move is 98. So obviously, when we roll that dice, he's going to land on no driving dribble move. He's not going to do anything more often than not. So that 70 we have up there is now bigger because we just rolled this down. If I make this 0, that 70 is now crazy and he's going to do crossovers every single time he drives, damn near. So you have to keep in mind that these do compete with one another. That's super, super important when you're making tendencies. So what attack strong on drive is going to do is if you have this 100, he's going to be basically Giannis Antetokounmpo. When he drives, he's going to tunnel vision, put his head down, and just try to pile through everybody. Whereas if I had this, 85, he'd be a little more lenient. Maybe if he's driving, he realizes that the defense is kind of closing in on him, he might pass out or walk it back. Be a little more aware of the situation. Now that I have a better understanding of it, if I put this 65, even 45 isn't that bad. If I want to make a player like Chris Paul, a player like Steve Nash, somebody who, as a guard, if they come off a pick and roll, they're holding the guy behind them, they're moving laterally to the goal, they're kind of waiting for things to develop, and they're keeping their head up. So it's not a bad thing to have. If you want to make a guy who's really good at slashing, like a Derrick Rose or John Moran or some sort, you are going to want attack, strong, and drive probably in the mid 80s, high 80s. But like I said, for Chris Paul, for guys that you want to be passers, you want them to look like a Rajon Rondo, somebody who's just really smart with the ball. You can have this lower, and it definitely doesn't hurt that much. All right, so now that we're in passing, dish to open man is super important when you're looking at your assist numbers when you sim, because this is basically the only passing tendency in the game. This is the only thing that's going to really determine the willingness for your character to pass. So if you put this 100, if you have decent passing attributes at all, you should be getting 10 assists a game as long as you have the minutes. Obviously, if you put this too high, he's going to pass in situations where he could have scored, kind of like a Ben Simmons. And if you have a post scorer, I'd be really wary of having this really high as well, because the second you get in the post, everybody's going to kind of take a step off of their defender from the perimeter, and your character is not going to try to score in the post like you want him to. He's just going to see that little sliver and pass out every single time. So it's not bad to have this kind of low. Now, flashy pass is really just how often they do the flashy pass animation. Alley-oop pass is how often that they'll throw an alley-oop. Obviously, once you get to like 85, 90, sometimes it's not the right situation. They're forcing it. They're just going to throw it out of bounds. So don't try to have this too high. And obviously, some flashy passes, it's not always the right time to do a flashy pass. A lot of the new signature pass animations are slower than the actual regular pass. So, for example, you might mess up a play because you did a 3-second long pass animation instead of, the regular second pass because you chose to do flashy. So this can hurt you. Don't think, oh, well, I just want them to be flashy. It won't affect me at all. It definitely will, and especially if you're going to watch the player play. Now, going into the post-up tendencies, at this point, if you don't understand that tendencies compete with one another, you're not going to understand how these work at all. So I'm going to break it down into only the bits that compete with one another so that we can kind of get you to understand what we're dealing with. So post-up, how often he's going to post up in general. Now, this does compete with your spot-ups. So spot up mid, spot up three, spot up drive. If you're running a freelance offense, if he has nothing to do and post up's really high, he's going to go post up instead of spot up at the wing. So you do want this pretty high if you actually want your guy to get it in the post. I would say at least 75. Any lower than that, I genuinely feel like they don't get the ball very much unless you just give them a bunch of post up plays. Now, once your player is in the post, the next thing your character is going to think is post face up, post back down, post aggressive back down, or shoot from post. These are what's now competing when your character gets the ball in the post. So post face up would be to exit the post and face your defender. You're now in a triple threat, and then it'll go to your triple threat tendencies. Post back down, he's obviously just going to back down your defender closer to the goal. Post aggressive back down, he's going to be doing the exact same thing, except he's going to be holding right trigger, and then shoot from post. So if your character lands on shoot from post as a dice roll, then he will go through everything in here that is a shot, except for post drive and post spin, because those aren't inherently shots. So if you noticed when we came in here, this guy I made to be a post scorer, so obviously he's going to have post up really high, post back down, post aggressive back down is really high, shoot from post is 30. Now, if we were going off the rules of the other tendencies that I was talking about, he wouldn't really shoot from the post much because he's too busy backing them down. Post is a little different because every second he's going to rerun through these tendencies instead of just choosing one from the get-go. So the second he posts up, he's going to think of those four things: post face up, back down, aggressive back down, or shoot from post. So if he lands on aggressive back down, he'll do a hard back down. Maybe next time he lands on post back down. For the next dribble, he's going to do a post back down regular with less aggression. Maybe then he lands on post face up and he leaves the post, and then he goes into his regular tendencies. All these things can happen. So there's actually more chances for him to land on shoot from post. So the way that I've set him up is that he'll back down a few times more often than not before he actually decides to shoot. Let's say he did land on shoot. What's actually competing now? Post hook to his left. So that means with his back to the goal, he's going to his left. It does not mean he's using his left hand. So try to keep that in mind. And the same thing for post fade. So post hook left, post hook right, post fade left, post fade right, post up and under, post hop shot, post step back, post drop step, post hop step. Now, there's a lot going on here, so I'm going to break it down as we go. First off, post fade is going to affect a lot if you have midi magician or whatever the mid-range maestro, whatever badge that it is. That's going to affect your post fades. Offline, you can give him a post fade actual attribute, but online you can't. But it definitely does help to have that badge. So if you give him a high post fade, you give him some post fade tendencies, and you're wondering why he's not making it, you might just need that badge. Post up and under, he will do this even if you don't have the actual pump fake tendency or the step through tendency. I don't really think this is that effective because a lot of tendencies that are already in the game that 2K themselves has made, AI just doesn't really go for blocks very often. So your pump fakes aren't really going to do much. Instead of getting him in the air and taking that step through, he's really just stepping through right into a guy who's there the whole time and taking a bad shot. Now post hop shot is going to affect your mid-range maestro badge again. Same for post step back shot. Post drop step, there's a drop step badge, and post hop step is really useless unless you have a really high post control attribute. Same for post drive. Post drive is another one where it's completely useless unless you have a high post control attribute. Now post spin, even if you have a high post control, you're going to probably need the badge for him to actually do a post spin. Both of these are inherently the same thing. Like I said, they just take effect off of different attributes and different badges. Post drive is a lot more power and post spin is a lot more finesse. So it's really just kind of a visual difference of what you really want your player to do. Now, a few other things to keep in mind as we get into post shimmy shot. If I have post shimmy, let's say 50, then you can say that half the time I do a post hook or a post fade, it's going to be a shimmy variation, which is basically the Kobe Bryant sort of, back shimmy into your shot. I will say there is a badge for this now, but if you do not have this badge, it will lower the percentage of you actually making the shot. And dependent on whatever signature animation you have for your shimmy shot, it might be one that doesn't actually get you much separation from the defender and the shot's just worse. So it's not always a good thing to do shimmy shot. If you just want your player to do it because it looks cool, sure. But keep in mind that you do have to have the badges and you do have to have a good animation for it to actually be useful. And with post up and under, obviously if I have post hook through the roof and I don't have post fade on here, then when he does a post up and under or when he does a post shimmy, he's going to do it out of a hook, because that's what I have it set to. So you really can break it down and kind of make the exact player that you want. Post game is really, confusing, so I hope I explained that the best I could. And we're going to go into freelance now. So shot is how often that a play will be ran for them to shoot the ball. Obviously I have him 99, he's going to shoot majority of the shots. Touches is how often they will get the ball and be involved in the offense. If you want a guy like Draymond Green, he'll have a lot of touches, but he's not going to shoot the ball much. You can do that, and vice versa. If you want a guy who only really gets the ball when it's time for him to shoot versus he's not really in the offense as far as moving the ball around, you can do that as well. Now roll versus pop, this is mainly for big mans. If you have the pick and roll man play type, when you are the guy setting the screen, after that screen is set, roll would mean that you go towards the basket or you pop off for a jumper and hope that the defenders follow the guard that you set a screen for down to the goal. And this works a lot like drive right from earlier. So if it's 50, this one could be a bit confusing because the name is off. The higher you go, the more often that player is going to roll towards the basket, and the lower you go from 50, the more that player is going to pop away from the basket after setting a screen. So keep that in mind. That's really important. You don't want to get those two mixed up. Transition spot up, when you're on a fast break and you do not have the ball, basically the dice roll that your character is going to spot up for a shot. If you're making a Ray Allen, a Klay Thompson, obviously you want this really high. They're not really going to attack the basket. They have a different role when you're on a fast break. Now ISO versus elite, good, average, and poor. If you're going against a poor defender, your player might just decide, even though I don't have the isolation tendency, or the play type rather, your guy might just decide, I have a poor defender on me, I'm just going to go one-on-one with him, I think I can score. And you can do that against an average defender, a good defender, or an elite defender. Now, if you have these set up and you have a play type to isolate, obviously I could just put these all 100 and I could give him only isolation play types and he would come up the floor and isolate every single time, especially if I had shot 100. You really can set him up to do that. Now, play discipline is another one of those where I used to have a different kind of idea of what it meant. If I have play discipline 100, that means when we start a play, I just run that play. I'm never going to break out of it. I'm never going to do anything other than what the play told me to do. Whereas if I have play discipline maybe 15, maybe we're running the play and my defender's super overplaying the pass, I might just cut because that's what I should do. I'm going to break out of the play because I feel like that's the better thing to do. For most stars, you want this to be really low. You can see I have him at 2 because a lot of the plays in this game simply don't work. They're too long. The players are clunky. They have to be right in the specific circle that they put on the floor and they can't really get there. It's just weird. Sometimes the full play doesn't even play out. So I like to give guys that are going to be stars of a team really low play discipline so that, hey, this isn't working, break it down, just set me a screen and we'll do something else and actually try to score. I would recommend you do that as well. Going to defense tendencies, these are super simple. Pass interception. While I'm editing this, I realized I didn't explain this really well. Basically, pass interception is that player's willingness to go for steals in the passing lanes. So obviously too high, and he might just jump at everything and put himself out of position, but you do want this pretty high for the most part so he can steal those bad passes, especially for bigs, because a lot of the AI like to kind of force the pick and roll pass to the roll man, and the big can get a lot of steals off of that. Take charge. In 2K23, I think they've actually done a lot better job of making this matter, although there are certain times where the character just kind of stops playing D to try to take a charge and it looks wonky. You could have this 65-70, and I think that's completely fine if that's, the type of player you want to make, and I think there are times where you will get that charge and it'll benefit you. Now, on ball steal, when you're defending the offensive player on the ball, this is how often you're just going to go for a steal instead of just standing in front of them. And another thing to keep in mind, pickpocket is going to kick in when you're doing on-ball steals. So if I put this like 95, but he doesn't have a really good steal attribute, he doesn't have the pickpocket badge, I can't really expect him to get steals. He's really just going to foul out. Now, contest shot, this is how often he thinks in his head, I'm going to contest this shot. If I put this 0, he's going to think to himself, I don't care. James Harden on the Rockets, I don't care to put a hand up. It's beneath me. Block shot is completely separate from contest shot. So I could give him block shot 95, contest shot 5, right? And whenever somebody pump fakes, whenever somebody is actually shooting, you're going to go for a block almost every single time. And this is what I was talking about earlier about how 2K doesn't really give the guys they make a really high block, which is another reason why if you're on a fast break and you're playing against a CPU, they never go for chase down blocks, and it's really just because of this rating here. I really wish they would be higher on a lot of the guys that they make, especially LeBron himself. So if you want to make a guy who will just try to beat everything, put this 100, contest shot 0. Contest shot's really just them wanting to get a hand up in general. On the flip side, obviously, if you want to make a Joakim Noah who maybe doesn't go for a full block every single time, but will obviously try to contest that shot to the best of his ability every time, you can set block shot pretty low and contest shot really high, and you can get that sort of play style as well. Now, foul, this is how often you'll foul in general. You might get a foul animation instead of the actual steal or contest that you're going for. And as for hard fouls, having this high means that when you foul, sometimes the animation is going to be a lot more rough, and some of them can even give you flagrant calls. I will say, if you put both of these to 0 and you're thinking, I've broke the system, he's never going to get a foul, I'll just bump up on-ball steal to 100 and he'll just get 80 steals a game. It's not going to work like that. You are still going to get fouls, just at a lower frequency than if you had this pretty high. A lot of these things are kind of for personality. If I'm making a Draymond type of guy, yeah, I want hard foul pretty high. If I'm making a Ben Wallace, I want hard foul pretty high. A lot of these tendencies just allow you to really bring to life the character that you have in your head, and that's why I love doing them so much. So that's it for this video. I hope I explained everything well enough to where you can leave this video with a better understanding of how everything works. If it did, leave a like, and if you have any questions, the comment section is always open. On this channel, I make custom tendencies for current and past players, and the viewers always choose the next video with the voting polls that I post on the community tab. So if that's something you're into, subscribe, and I'll see you in the next video. Thanks for watching, guys.